Charles Whitman sat in his opulent office, a glass fortress high above the city, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. The golden rays reflected off the tall buildings, casting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the chill that had settled in his heart. Recently divorced, Charles felt the weight of isolation pressed down on him, an oppressive blanket that his wealth could not lift. He drummed his fingers on the polished mahogany desk, glancing at the framed photos that adorned it. Smiling faces caught in moments of joy felt foreign now, reminders of a life he once cherished, but had crumbled into a memory of loneliness. His office was a testament to his success. Sleek, modern furniture, the latest technology, and a breathtaking view that anyone would envy. Yet as he stared at the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was merely a spectator in his own life. The laughing voices of his colleagues and friends echoed in his mind, but they felt distant, like a soundtrack to a movie he no longer wished to watch. He sighed heavily, reaching for a glass of whiskey, hoping the amber liquid could soothe the gnawing ache inside. "Mr. Whitman?" A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Maria Gonzalez, his housekeeper, standing at the door with a stack of neatly organized papers in her hands. She was a woman of modest means, dedicated and fiercely loyal. Maria had worked for him for years, yet their interactions had always been cordial but distant, confined to the boundaries of employer and employee. "Yes, Maria," he replied, trying to mask the heaviness in his tone. "I wanted to remind you about the dinner event tonight. Your suit is ready," she said, stepping into the room with an air of professionalism that he admired. "Is there anything else you need before I go?" Charles gave her a small nod, his mind still wandering. "No, that'll be all for now. Thank you." As she turned to leave, he noticed the way her hands fidgeted with the papers, a subtle sign of her own nervousness. It struck him then how often he overlooked the lives of those around him, the people who worked tirelessly to keep his world running smoothly, while their own lives often went unnoticed. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, Maria Gonzalez sorted through the bills that cluttered her small kitchen table. The walls were adorned with photographs of her family, each smile a reminder of her roots and the sacrifices they made for her to pursue a better life. She had always admired the world of luxury from afar, often catching glimpses of it through the grand windows of the Whitman estate where she worked. Maria felt the weight of her dreams pressing down on her as she glanced at the clock. The evening would bring another shift at the Whitman residence, and while the thought of spending more time in that magnificent house excited her, it also reminded her of the vast chasm between her life and the life of her employer. She longed for a taste of the elegance that surrounded her, but felt tethered to her reality by the responsibilities of her modest income. "Maybe one day," she whispered to herself, folding a bill and placing it aside, "maybe one day I can change all of this." As the evening descended, Charles returned home, the weight of the day still clinging to him. He walked through the grand entrance, the marble floors reflecting the soft glow of the chandelier above. The house was quiet, save for the faint sound of Maria humming to herself in the kitchen. It was a simple melody, yet it brought a sense of warmth that he hadn't felt in ages. "Maria," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the vastness of the foyer. "In here, Mr. Whitman," she replied, her voice brightening as she stepped into the hallway, a dish towel draped over her shoulder. "How was your day?" Same old," he replied, leaning against the wall with a sigh. "Just the usual meetings and phone calls." Maria studied him for a moment, her brow furrowing with concern. "You look tired, sir. Perhaps you should take a break." Charles chuckled lightly, a sound that felt foreign to him. "When does a billionaire take a break, Maria? The world keeps spinning without me." "Well, even billionaires need to recharge," she replied, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "What if you took a moment to reflect on what truly makes you happy?" He raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her suggestion. "And what do you think that is? Family? Friends? Maybe even dreams?" Maria offered, her voice softening as she spoke. Charles was taken aback by her insight. It was strange to hear his housekeeper speak about dreams, as if she knew him more than he knew himself. "Dreams, huh? I suppose I used to have those. Before." His voice trailed off, the memory of his marriage's disintegration stinging like a fresh wound. Before what? Maria asked, her curiosity piqued. Before I became just another name in the boardroom, he replied, his eyes distant. I used to have visions of changing the world, of creating something that would leave a mark. Now I just feel lost. Maria's heart ached for him. Maybe you need to remember why you started. Sometimes talking to someone who isn't in the industry can help. Fresh perspectives can lead to new ideas. Like you? Charles asked, a playful smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Perhaps, she said, a shy smile spreading across her face. I may not have your experience, but I can offer a different angle. Sometimes it's the simplest ideas that lead to the best solutions. His gaze lingered on her, and for the first time, he really saw her. Not just as an employee, but as a person with her own dreams and insights. You know, Maria, I appreciate your perspective. It's refreshing. Thank you, sir, she replied, a warm blush creeping into her cheeks. I just want to help in any way I can. Actually, Charles said, a sudden idea sparking in his mind, would you be interested in joining me for an important meeting next week? I could use someone who thinks outside the box. Maria's eyes widened in shock. Me? Oh no, I don't think I'm the right person for that, Mr. Whitman. Why not? You have a unique outlook, and I value your opinion. It could be an interesting experience for you. She hesitated, contemplating the offer. The thought of stepping into the corporate world, even for a moment, sent a thrill of anxiety through her. I'll think about it, she finally said, trying to keep her voice steady. Do that, he said, sensing the hesitation in her tone. Just consider it. It could be a chance for both of us to gain something new. As they continued to chat, a connection sparked between them, a thread weaving through the fabric of their disparate lives. For the first time, they were not just employer and employee. They were two souls sharing a moment of vulnerability amidst the chaos of their realities. Little did they know, this moment would set the stage for a journey neither could have anticipated. Charles Whitman sat at his polished mahogany desk, the weight of the world perched on his shoulders as he prepared for one of the most critical meetings of his career. The soft hum of the city outside his office window contrasted sharply with the storm of anxiety brewing within him. The skyline glittered in the fading light, a beautiful yet cruel reminder of the success he had achieved and the emptiness that accompanied it. He flipped through his presentation notes, the words blurring together as he struggled to focus. Investors were fickle creatures, and today's meeting could either launch his new tech venture into the stratosphere or send it crashing down before it even took flight. As he paced the room, the door creaked open and Maria Gonzalez entered, her presence instantly calming him. She was dressed in her usual practical attire, a simple blouse and slacks, but there was an undeniable spark of warmth in her demeanor that always seemed to light up the starkness of his office. Mr. Whitman, she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel, I thought you might want some coffee before your meeting. Thank you, Maria, he replied, his voice softer than he intended. Just the way I like it, please. She moved to the coffee machine, her movements graceful and efficient. Charles watched her from the corner of his eye, marveling at how someone so grounded could bring a sense of balance to his chaotic life. Are you nervous? Maria asked, glancing back at him as she poured the steaming liquid into a mug. Nervous doesn't quite cover it, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I feel like my entire future hinges on this presentation. If I don't impress them, this venture could go down in flames. Maria approached him, coffee in hand, and offered it with a gentle smile. You've built an empire, Charles. You know what you're doing. Just speak from the heart. He took the mug, feeling the warmth seep through his fingers. You make it sound so easy. Maybe it is, she teased lightly. Just remember, they're looking for someone who believes in their vision. If you believe in it, they will too. Her words struck a chord within him, igniting a flicker of confidence. You know, I never thought I would say this, but I could use a fresh perspective. You've always had a knack for seeing things differently. Maria raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Are you suggesting I should join you in the meeting? Charles hesitated, the idea forming in his mind but feeling utterly absurd. Well, why not? You might have insights that could surprise them. Surprise me. Maria's eyes widened, a mix of disbelief and excitement crossing her face. You're serious? I don't know anything about business. You know people, he countered, his tone earnest. And sometimes that's more important than knowing the numbers. Just think about it. Maria felt her heart race at the prospect. It was an opportunity that had never crossed her mind, a chance to step into a world she had only glimpsed from the sidelines. "Okay, I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. "Great, it's tomorrow at 10. I'll pick you up," he said, feeling a rush of adrenaline. As Maria left the office, her mind buzzed with the implications of her decision. This was a leap into the unknown, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it could change everything. In her modest apartment later that evening, she stood in front of her closet, staring at the limited options hanging there. She needed to look the part, but how could she possibly compete with the polished professionals she would be facing? After rummaging through her clothes, she finally settled on a simple navy dress paired with a blazer she had saved for special occasions. It was not extravagant, but it fit well and made her feel somewhat confident. She practiced her breathing, trying to calm the storm of nerves inside her. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, glancing in the mirror. "You're not just a housekeeper. You have a voice, and it matters." As the evening wore on, Maria found herself rehearsing potential responses to questions she imagined the investors might ask. She visualized the boardroom, the long table surrounded by suited men and women, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. What if they laughed at her? What if she said something foolish? With each passing hour, she grew more resolute. She would not let fear hold her back. Charles had invited her for a reason. He believed in her. The next morning dawned, bright and crisp. Maria arrived at Charles's mansion, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. When he opened the door, she could see the same nerves reflected in his eyes. "You look great," he said, a genuine smile breaking through the tension. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Are you ready?" "Let's do this," he said, his voice firm, though she could sense the undercurrent of anxiety beneath the bravado. They drove in silence, the city unfolding around them, a tapestry of ambition and dreams. Charles's mind raced with the presentation, while Maria's thoughts swirled around the newness of the situation. As they parked outside the sleek glass building where the meeting was to take place, she took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of uncertainty. Inside, they were greeted by a sleek lobby, and Maria felt small amid the modern luxury. The investors were already gathered in the conference room, their expressions serious and expectant. Charles glanced at her, a hint of reassurance in his eyes. "Just remember, we're in this together," he said softly. "Right," she nodded, trying to channel her determination. As they entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. The investors were polished and poised, their demeanor exuding authority. Charles launched into his presentation, his voice confident, but she could sense the intensity of his focus. Maria listened intently, her heart racing, but as the discussion progressed, she felt an unexpected surge of clarity. When Charles opened the floor for questions, she took a deep breath, her hand rising without conscious thought. "Actually," she began, her voice steady despite the sea of skeptical eyes on her, "I think it's important to consider how your users will interact with the technology. It's not just about the features, it's about the experience they'll have." Charles turned slightly, surprise flashing across his face, but he quickly masked it with a nod of encouragement. The investors glanced at each other, intrigued. "Please, go on," one of them said, leaning forward, curiosity piqued. Maria continued, drawing from her own experiences and observations, weaving in anecdotes that highlighted the human aspect of technology. As she spoke, the tension in the room shifted. She could see the investors leaning in, their expressions softening. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, like her voice mattered in this world of wealth and ambition. After the meeting, as they stepped out into the crisp air, Maria felt a rush of exhilaration. "I can't believe I actually spoke up," she exclaimed, unable to contain her excitement. Charles looked at her, a wide grin spreading across his face. "You were amazing, Maria. I think you really made an impression." "I didn't expect that," she said, her heart still racing. "I was so nervous." "Yet you handled it like a pro," he replied, his admiration palpable. The energy between them crackled with unspoken possibilities, and for the first time, Maria felt a deeper connection to Charles, one that transcended their roles in each other's lives. As they drove home, the city lights began to twinkle against the dusk sky, and Maria couldn't help but feel that something profound had shifted. The meeting had opened a door, not just to a new professional chapter, but to a deeper understanding of herself and her place in the world. In the quiet of the car, Charles glanced over at her, the weight of the earlier tension dissipating. "You know, I think I underestimated you," he said, his voice low and genuine. "You have a unique perspective and it's refreshing." Maria's cheeks flushed, a mix of pride and surprise flooding her senses. "Thank you, Charles. That means a lot coming from you." As they pulled into the driveway, both were left with a sense of anticipation, the promise of what lay ahead lingering in the air between them, an invisible thread that would soon unravel into something neither could predict. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as the investors settled in, their eyes darting curiously from Charles to Maria. The sleek, modern space was adorned with minimalist art and state-of-the-art technology, a stark contrast to the modest surroundings Maria was accustomed to. She felt small in her tailored dress, the fabric hugging her curves, while still allowing her to breathe. But the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her shoulders. She could sense the stakes. This meeting could change everything. Charles stood at the head of the long table, his confident demeanor a mask for the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. He had always thrived in high-pressure scenarios, yet this time, he felt a strange comfort in having Maria beside him. He had invited her for a fresh perspective, but as he glanced at her, he realized he was also seeking her support. Their eyes met, and he offered her a reassuring nod, a silent promise that they were in this together. "Good morning, everyone," Charles began, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. "Thank you for joining us today to discuss the launch of our innovative tech platform designed to enhance user experience in online interactions." As he spoke, Maria's mind raced. She had spent the night rehearsing potential questions and responses, but now, as she sat in the plush chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, doubt began to creep in. The investors were seasoned professionals, their expressions inscrutable as Charles detailed the features of the platform. Suddenly, one of the investors, a sharp-looking woman named Evelyn with glasses perched on her nose, leaned forward. "Charles," she interjected, "while your presentation is solid, I have to ask, what makes your platform different from the others out there? What's the unique value proposition?" It was a fair question, one that Charles was prepared for, but he felt a flicker of uncertainty. Just as he was about to respond, he noticed Maria shifting in her seat, her eyes bright with an idea. Encouraged by his glance, she took a deep breath and raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling within her. All eyes turned toward her, some investors visibly surprised. That Charles's housekeeper would speak up. "I believe the unique value lies not just in the technology itself, but in how it connects with the users on a personal level. Many platforms focus on features, but what they often overlook is the emotional journey of the user. If we can create a platform that resonates with people's feelings, we can build a loyal community." The room fell silent for a moment, the investors processing her words. Charles's heart raced with pride. This was the Maria he had come to know, insightful, intelligent, and unafraid to speak her mind. Evelyn's eyebrows lifted in surprise and a smile crept across her face. "That's an interesting perspective. Can you elaborate on how you envision this emotional connection?" Maria's mind raced, the implications of her words dawning on her. She hadn't expected to be asked to elaborate, but in that moment, she felt a surge of confidence. Certainly, it starts with user feedback. We need to actively listen to our users and understand their experiences. We can implement features that allow them to express their feelings and needs, which will help us tailor our platform to their desires. Think of it as creating a dialogue rather than a monologue. Charles watched her intently, his admiration growing as she articulated her vision. He had always valued user experience, but her approach added a layer he hadn't considered deeply enough. The room was now abuzz with murmurs, investors exchanging glances, intrigued by this unexpected input from an outsider. Charles seized the moment, jumping in to reinforce Maria's points. "Exactly. We're not just creating a product, we're fostering a community. Maria's insights will be instrumental in shaping our strategy moving forward." As the discussion evolved, Maria found herself drawn deeper into the conversation, her nerves melting away. She shared ideas, sparking debates among the investors who were now looking at her not just as a housekeeper, but as a valuable contributor. Charles felt a rush of exhilaration. This was a pivotal moment for both of them. When the meeting finally concluded, the investors exchanged business cards and congratulated each other on the fruitful discussion. Maria was still processing the whirlwind of the last hour when Charles approached her, a broad grin on his face. "You were incredible, Maria. I didn't expect you to be that fearless. You really impressed them," he said, his enthusiasm infectious. "Thank you, Charles. I was just trying to speak up, but I never thought they would take me seriously," she replied, a shy smile breaking through her usual reserved demeanor. "They took you seriously because you had something important to say," he insisted, his eyes sparkling. "This could change everything for us, you know. You brought a fresh perspective that I couldn't have articulated on my own." As they walked out of the conference room together, the atmosphere shifted between them. The air felt charged with an unspoken connection, an acknowledgement of how their lives had intertwined unexpectedly. Once outside, they found a quiet corner in the bustling lobby. "I can't believe I did that," Maria said, her voice a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. "I felt so out of my league, but it felt good to contribute." "Maria, you belong in that world," Charles said earnestly. "You have so much to offer. I want you to be a part of this project going forward. I don't just want your help, I want your insights." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Maria's heart raced at the thought of crossing the line from employee to collaborator. "Are you sure? I mean, I'm just your housekeeper. This is a whole new level." Charles stepped closer, his expression serious. "You're so much more than that to me. We've built something special, and I want us to explore it further. I don't want this to just be a professional relationship." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the shift, the deepening of their bond, but hearing him voice it made her heart swell with hope and trepidation. "But what about everything else? Our worlds are so different, Charles. What will people say?" "Let them say what they want," he replied, his voice firm. "I'm tired of living for others. I want to live for myself and for you, if you'll let me." As they stood there, the noise of the bustling city faded into a distant hum, and for the first time, Maria allowed herself to envision a future that included Charles beyond the confines of their current roles. The walls that had separated them began to feel more like opportunities for connection. Later that evening, back at her modest apartment, Maria sat on the edge of her bed, her mind racing. She replayed the events of the day, her heart fluttering at the thought of Charles's words. Yet a shadow of doubt lingered. The societal divide loomed large in her mind. The expectations, the judgments, the whispers they would face. Could she truly step into his world, where wealth and power dictated norms she had never experienced? She stood up and paced her small living space, the walls closing in as she wrestled with her emotions. It was clear that something profound had changed between them. But could it withstand the pressures of their vastly different lives? The prospect of losing what they had built terrified her, yet the thought of distancing herself from Charles felt equally unbearable. With a sigh, she plopped down on her bed, burying her face in her hands. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to the empty room, her heart heavy with uncertainty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the sprawling estate of Charles Whitman, whispers began to circulate within the elite, social circles of the city. The opulent mansion, once a sanctuary of solitude for Charles, now buzzed with intrigue and speculation. His recent friendship with Maria Gonzalez had sent ripples of curiosity through the upper echelons of society, provoking reactions ranging from curiosity to disdain. At a gathering of Charles's closest associates, seated around a marble table adorned with extravagant floral arrangements, the conversation turned to the enigmatic housekeeper. Sarah, Charles's ex-wife, leaned back in her chair, a sly smile playing on her lips as she surveyed the room. "Have you heard about Charles's little project?" she began, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "I hear he's been spending quite a bit of time with his housekeeper. It's almost quaint, don't you think?" Several guests exchanged glances, their interest piqued. One of them, a sharp-eyed investor named Victor, raised an eyebrow. "You mean Maria, The one who spoke at the meeting? I must say, I was surprised by her insights. Quite refreshing. Refreshing indeed, Sarah replied, her tone laced with sarcasm. But let's not forget who she is. A housekeeper, mingling with billionaires. Can you imagine how that looks? Her words hung in the air, a thinly veiled jab meant to undermine Charles's judgment. Another guest, a woman in a sleek black dress, chimed in. I find it fascinating. It's like a modern-day Cinderella story. Who knows what kind of potential she has? Perhaps she's more than just a housekeeper. Or perhaps she's just taking advantage of a lonely man, Sarah interjected, her voice sharp. I've known Charles long enough to recognize when he's being played. The poor thing is vulnerable after our divorce. She's probably just biding her time until she can make a move. Across the city, in her modest apartment, Maria sat on the edge of her bed, her heart racing as she reread the email she had received that morning. The subject line read, Job offer, marketing coordinator. Her hands trembled slightly as she considered the implications. The upscale firm had sought her out after the meeting, impressed by her surprising contributions. It was everything she had dreamed of, a chance to escape her current financial struggles and step into a world of opportunity. But as the excitement washed over her, a wave of guilt followed. Leaving Charles felt like abandoning a lifeline. Their connection had grown beyond mere employer and employee. He had opened up to her in ways she never expected. The thought of stepping away from that bond was painful. She paced the small room, her mind racing. What if accepting the offer meant losing him? The prospect of a stable job was enticing, but it came with a price. What do I do? She murmured to herself, her reflection in the mirror showing a woman caught between ambition and loyalty. As she weighed her options, the doorbell rang, jolting her from her thoughts. She opened the door to find a delivery man holding a bouquet of stunning white lilies. Delivery for Maria Gonzalez, he said, a bright smile on his face. Me? She asked, surprised. Who sent these? Not sure, ma'am. Just the name on the package, he replied, handing them over. Maria took the flowers, her heart fluttering as she read the attached card. For the brightest star in my universe. Charles. Her breath caught in her throat and a rush of warmth spread through her. She could hardly believe it. Charles had sent her flowers, a gesture that spoke volumes of his feelings. Yet the joy was shadowed by her internal conflict. As night fell, Charles prepared for a lavish party at his mansion, a gathering meant to showcase his latest venture and reconnect with his social circle. He had spent the day distracted, thoughts of Maria, occupying his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship had evolved into something deeper. She understood him in ways no one else did, and he found solace in her presence. But with Sarah's words echoing in his head, he felt the weight of judgment looming over him. The party was in full swing when guests began to pour in, laughter and chatter filling the air. The mansion sparkled under the glow of chandeliers, and waiters glided through the crowd with trays of exquisite hors d'oeuvres. Charles greeted his guests with charm, but his mind was elsewhere, scanning the room for a glimpse of Maria. He knew she would be there, but he also sensed the tension that could arise from her presence amidst his former life. As the evening progressed, Sarah's eyes were sharp, darting around the room like a hawk. She had no intention of letting Charles's newfound friendship with Maria go unnoticed. She spotted Maria talking to Victor, a smirk forming on her face. "Charles, darling, you must see this," she called out, her voice dripping with faux excitement. Charles turned, his stomach nodding as he approached them. "Everything all right?" he asked, forcing a smile. "Oh, just a little conversation about your latest project," Sarah said, her tone innocuous. Maria here was just sharing her thoughts on marketing strategies. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she continued. "Isn't it fascinating how she's gotten so involved? I mean, it's not every day a housekeeper gets to advise a billionaire." Maria's cheeks flushed at Sarah's implication. She felt the weight of judgment in the air, a palpable tension that made her heart race. "I was just sharing my perspective," she replied, her voice steady despite the discomfort. "Everyone has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their background." "Touché," Sarah said, feigning admiration. "But let's not forget the boundaries of our positions, shall we? After all, Charles has a reputation to uphold." Her words dripped with condescension, aimed at undermining Maria's confidence. Before Charles could respond, Maria spoke up, her heart pounding. "I'm not trying to overstep, Sarah. Of course not," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp. "You wouldn't want anyone thinking you were trying to take advantage of Charles's kindness, would you?" The room seemed to hold its breath, all eyes on the unfolding confrontation. Charles stepped forward, his expression hardening. "That's enough, Sarah," he said, his voice low but firm. "Maria has every right to be here, and she's proven herself more than capable. I invited her, and I believe in her insights." Maria's heart raced at his defense, but the tension was thick. She felt exposed, caught between two worlds that suddenly felt irreconcilable. "I think I should go," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to leave, her heart aching. "Maria, wait," Charles called after her, but the crowd's attention had shifted, and she felt cornered by the weight of their scrutiny. The door swung shut behind her, leaving Charles and Sarah locked in a silent standoff, the air heavy with unspoken words. As Maria stepped outside into the cool night air, she felt the sting of tears welling in her eyes. The confrontation had been raw and uncomfortable, exacerbating her internal struggle. She knew she had to make a choice, one that would shape her future and her bond with Charles. The atmosphere in Charles Whitman's grand mansion felt heavy after the confrontation at the party. Maria Gonzalez stood in her small, neatly organized room, surrounded by the remnants of her life as a housekeeper. The elegant decor of the mansion seemed worlds away from her reality, and now, after Sarah's cutting words, she felt more like an intruder than ever. The words, "trying to take advantage," echoed in, her mind twisting like a knife in her chest. She had never intended to disrupt anything. She had only been trying to support Charles, the man who had unexpectedly become a source of comfort in her life. Maria's heart raced as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The vibrant blouse she had chosen for the party now felt like a costume, something that didn't belong to her. She tugged at the fabric, wishing she could erase the memory of Sarah's disdainful gaze. Just then, her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Charles, asking if they could talk. "Of course he wants to talk," she muttered to herself, the sarcasm bitter on her tongue. "He probably wants to apologize for dragging me into his world." Yet despite the turmoil inside her, she found herself typing a quick response, agreeing to meet him in the garden. As Maria stepped outside, the cool night air hit her like a refreshing wave. The garden was a beautiful escape, adorned with fragrant flowers and soft, ambient lighting. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Moments later, Charles appeared, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. He looked weary, his usually confident demeanor dulled by frustration. "Maria," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I'm glad you came." She offered a small nod, her heart fluttering at the sight of him. "I didn't want to. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. After what happened? I know, I'm sorry about Sarah. She can be, well, she's always been like that," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture she found endearing in his vulnerability. "But you don't have to feel that way. You haven't disrupted anything. What happened at the meeting? That was genuine. You were incredible." Maria felt a swell of pride at his words, but quickly quelled it with a wave of self-doubt. "I don't know, Charles. I'm just a housekeeper. I don't belong in your world. I never wanted to intrude." "Stop," he said, stepping closer, his gaze intense. "You are not an intrusion. You've brought insight and perspective that I didn't even know I needed. I value what you bring to the table." She looked away, her heart pounding. "But what about Sarah and everyone else? They won't understand. I don't want to be the reason for more trouble in your life." Charles paused, his expression shifting from concern to determination. "I don't care what they think. I care about you." Maria's breath caught in her throat. The sincerity in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "Charles, you don't know what you're saying. You're a billionaire and I'm just Maria." "Just Maria?" he echoed incredulously. "You're more than that. You're smart, compassionate, and you've helped me more than you realize. I've been lonely since the divorce, and you've become important to me." His words hung in the air, and Maria felt a mix of elation and fear. I appreciate that, but it's complicated. I've seen how people look at me. If we cross that line, it could change everything. I'm willing to take that risk, he said, his voice steady. What are you afraid of? She opened her mouth to respond, but hesitated, the weight of her past pressing down on her. You wouldn't understand. My life has always been about survival. I've had to make sacrifices, hide parts of myself. There are things I've never told anyone. Then tell me, he urged softly, his eyes searching hers. I'm here. Whatever it is, I want to understand. I want all of you. Maria turned away, her heart racing as she fought against the tide of emotions. I can't. It's too much to explain. Try, he insisted, taking a step closer, closing the distance between them. I won't judge you. I promise. In that moment, she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the warmth that had grown between them. But could she really share her past? With a deep breath, she steeled herself. Okay, but you have to promise me you won't see me differently after this. I promise, he said, his tone earnest. Maria glanced at the ground, gathering her thoughts. I grew up in a small town, always struggling to make ends meet. My family didn't have much. My parents worked hard, but it was never enough. I learned early on that I had to fend for myself. I took on jobs, even in high school, to help pay bills. Charles listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. That must have been hard. It was, she continued, her voice steadying. And when I got the chance to move here for this job, I thought it would be my break. But I still carry that weight, the feeling that I'm just one mistake away from losing everything. Sometimes I think I don't deserve this life, this opportunity. You do deserve it, he interrupted, and you deserve love and happiness too. Please don't think you're less than anyone because of where you came from. Maria could feel the warmth of his words wrapping around her, but the fear of rejection lingered. But what if I disrupt everything again? What if they find out about us? I don't want to be a scandal, Charles. He stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Then let's create our own narrative, together. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to be with you. Her heart raced, caught between the thrill of his declaration and the fear of the unknown. But what about your reputation, your business? Let me worry about that, he urged, placing a hand on her shoulder, sending a jolt of electricity through her. I'm more than just my name or my wealth. I want to be with you, Maria. Just you. The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell, but doubt still lingered. I don't know if I can do this, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Then let's take it one step at a time, he suggested. We can start as friends and see where it goes. No pressure. Maria felt a glimmer of hope amidst her fears. I'd like that, she replied softly, her eyes meeting his. But there's still so much to consider. Then let's consider it together, he said, his voice a soothing balm to her worries. Just as she was about to respond, the weight of another unspoken secret pressed against her heart. There's something else I need to tell you, Charles, she began, her voice trembling. He looked at her, concern etched on his features. What is it? I've kept something from you, something that could change everything. Maria took a deep breath, knowing that this revelation could alter the fragile bond they had begun to forge. As she prepared to reveal her past, she felt the world around her fade away. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over Charles Whitman's office, illuminating the sleek, modern furniture that filled the expansive space. He paced back and forth, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. After his tumultuous divorce, Charles had found himself in a precarious position, both personally and professionally. The phone on his desk buzzed insistently, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. He glanced at the screen and his heart sank. It was his lawyer, Mark. Charles, Mark's voice came through the phone, sharp and urgent. We need to talk. It's about Sarah. Is this about the investors? Charles asked, his voice tinged with frustration. I thought we had everything under control. Not just the investors. There's a potential scandal brewing, and it could threaten everything you've built, Mark replied, his tone grave. Scandal? Charles felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What do you mean? Sarah has been digging into your finances. We think she's manipulating records to frame you, leveraging your vulnerabilities to gain control over your company, Mark explained. Charles clenched his jaw, a wave of anger washing over him. What evidence do you have? Enough to raise concerns, but we need more. We need to act fast, Charles. If this goes public, it could ruin your reputation and your business, Mark warned. Send me everything you have. I need to confront her, Charles said, his voice resolute. He hung up, his mind racing. The last thing he wanted was to let Sarah drag him down again, especially now that he had begun to forge a deeper connection with Maria. Meanwhile, Maria Gonzalez was at home, her thoughts consumed by the recent whirlwind of events. The unexpected invitation to the business meeting had catapulted her into a world she had only ever glimpsed from a distance. As she sat at her small kitchen table, she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. Not just in Charles's life, but in hers as well. Just as she reached for her phone to check if Charles had messaged her, it buzzed with a sudden urgency. It was a text from him. "Can we talk? It's urgent." Maria's heart thudded in her chest. The gravity of the message sent shivers down her spine. She quickly gathered herself and headed to his mansion, her mind racing with concern and curiosity. Upon arriving, Maria found Charles standing by the large windows, staring out at the sprawling city below. His expression was one of deep contemplation, shadowed by the weight of impending chaos. "Charles?" she called softly, stepping into the room. Her voice cut through the tension in the air. He turned, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. "Maria, I'm glad you came," he said, his voice strained. "I need your help." "Help? With what?" she asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Sarah's trying to sabotage me. She's been manipulating financial records, trying to frame me, and I need to find out how deep this goes," he explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Maria's heart raced as she absorbed his words. "What can I do?" "I need you to think back to anything you might know about her dealings, especially regarding the company's finances. You were around when she was here, and you might have seen or heard something," he urged, his gaze intense. Maria nodded slowly, her mind racing. "I can try, Charles, but I don't know if I'll remember anything significant." "Anything could help. Just be honest with me," he said, his voice softening. "I don't want to drag you into this, but I trust you." As they delved into the discussion, Maria's thoughts drifted to her own past. She had always kept her life private, hidden behind the veil of being a housekeeper. But now, standing in front of Charles, she felt an undeniable pull to share her burdens as well. "Charles," she began hesitantly, "there's something I haven't told you. Something from my past that might be relevant." He turned to face her fully, the concern in his eyes deepening. "What is it?" Maria took a deep breath, the weight of her secret heavy on her chest. "Before I came to work for you, I was involved with someone who had connections in finance. I know how easily numbers can be manipulated. I might not remember specifics, but I can help you understand how to uncover the truth." Charles stepped closer, his expression shifting to one of understanding. "You don't have to share anything you're uncomfortable with, Maria. I'm just grateful you're willing to help." "I want to help you," she replied earnestly, "but I need to be cautious. I don't want to become a target for Sarah." Just then, the doorbell rang, interrupting their moment of vulnerability. Charles frowned. "I'll get it," he said, moving toward the door. As he opened it, he was met with the last person he wanted to see, Sarah. Her presence immediately filled the room with tension. Dressed in designer clothes that exuded confidence, she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Charles, we need to talk," Sarah said, her tone commanding. "About what?" he shot back, annoyance lacing his voice. "About your little housekeeper," she smirked, glancing at Maria with disdain. "I've heard some interesting things, and I think it's time we have a little chat about boundaries." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She took a step back, unsure of how to proceed, but Charles stepped in front of her, protecting her from Sarah's icy glare. "Stay away from her, Sarah. This is between you and me," he declared, his voice firm. "Is it?" she sneered. "Because I think Maria here might be more involved than you realize." Maria's heart raced as she processed Sarah's insinuation. The last thing she wanted was to be caught in the crossfire of their battle. "I don't want any part of this," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. Too late, Sarah retorted, her eyes narrowing. You've already taken a part of Charles's life, and I can't let that continue. Charles turned, frustration boiling over. Enough. You're not going to intimidate her. You've already done enough damage. As the tension escalated, Maria felt a surge of determination. She understood the stakes now. If Sarah was capable of such manipulation, she had to make a choice. A choice that would not only impact her own life, but also Charles's future. Charles, she said, her voice cutting through the suffocating atmosphere. I need to think about how to handle this. I don't want to be caught in the middle of your fight with Sarah, but I can't stand by and let her ruin everything you've worked for. He turned to her, his expression softening once more. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Just know that you're not alone in this. As the confrontation continued, Maria felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She couldn't ignore the connection she had with Charles, nor could she turn her back on the truth that needed to come to light. But the unexpected revelation about Sarah's deceit loomed over her, threatening to unravel everything. Standing at this crossroads, Maria was faced with a choice: to protect herself and walk away, or to step into the fray and confront the danger head-on. The choice weighed heavily on her heart as she considered the implications of both paths. In a world filled with deception and ambition, would she have the courage to embrace her own truth, or would she retreat into the shadows once again? As the door closed behind Sarah, leaving an eerie silence in its wake, Maria knew that whatever decision she made next would define the course of her life and Charles's forever. The stakes were higher than ever, and the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty.